Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the University of Melbourne's third online water security series. My name's Sharon Davis, and I'm a Senior Enterprise Fellow with the Water, Environment and Agriculture program at the University of Melbourne. And I have the absolute pleasure of being the MC for today's webinar discussion. Today we'll be discussing how can we respond to the changing nature of the water energy nexus in urban water supply systems. And we have a great panel, so it should be a great session. But I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which I'm hosting this webinar, the Wurundjeri people, and pay my respects to their elders and families, past, present and emerging. Today's part of a regular series where we discuss important issues around water security, and we aim to bring together thought leaders from academia, industry and government to provide evidence-based insights and to raise the quality of debate around these issues. The Water, Environment and Agriculture Group at the University of Melbourne works with industry, government and communities to find innovative solutions to tackle water security and environmental challenges. This is the second year of our highly successful water security series, and we've covered a really broad range of topics to date, including gender equality, the impacts of recent bushfires on water resources, environmental outcomes of the Basin Plan, and diversified water supply systems. And if you'd like to learn more about the WEEP program or even view the prior seminars, you can find that information on our industry website. And we will have the address available through one of the slides in a moment. I also just wanted to flag that we'll be recording this event and therefore it will be available on the website as are the others. And a really important part of our session is the opportunity for the panel to be answering audience questions. So I'd really encourage you to engage with the panel through the Q&A box within Zoom, and it's usually at the bottom of the screen. So look for the Q&A icon, depending on your screen setup, where that will be, but you can use that as a mechanism to ask the panel questions as we go forward. If you'd like to engage using social media, on Twitter, the handle is #watersecurity20. So really encourage you to do that if you'd like to do that. And that address is on the screen now. As an Enterprise Senior Fellow, my role includes building a bridge between academia, government and industry, and through those connections and that exchange to create more positive outcomes for our sector as a whole. And our water security events are an important mechanism to create and strengthen these connections and to build greater understanding in our sector. And it's with great pleasure, I'll introduce the panellists for today's discussion. First up, we have Dr. Wenyan Wu. Dr. Wu is a lecturer in environmental hydrology and water resources in the Department of Infrastructure Engineering at the University of Melbourne and part of our Water, Environment and Agriculture program. She has over 10 years' experience across academia and industry, and her current research focuses on the use of numerical and statistical modelling tools to solve environmental engineering problems, including water resource supply system modelling and optimisation considering the water energy nexus. Next, Hi, Wenyan. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Lisa Blinko. Lisa, are you there? Dr. Blinko is a water... Hi, Lisa. She's a water systems optimisation engineer for South SA Water and an adjunct lecturer at the University of Adelaide. Lisa uses a specifically designed optimisation tool to plan the operation of SA Water's bulk water supply network, including pumped pipelines from the River Murray, reservoirs in the Mount Lofty Ranges and the Adelaide desalination plant, and major water treatment plants for the Adelaide metropolitan region. Great to have you with us, Lisa. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce Sean Cumming. Sean is the General Manager for Infrastructure and Technology at Barwon Water. Sean, do we have you there?
I'm here. Over at
Thank you. Great. Welcome. Over a 20 plus year career in the water industry, Sean has worked across both public and private sectors. He has extensive experience in strategy, operations, construction, business development, and large-scale project delivery. Finally, I'd like to introduce Professor Angus Simpson, who is a professor at the School of Civil, Environmental and Mining Engineering at the University of Adelaide. And his current research interests focus on planning, design, and operation of water distribution systems infrastructure. Since 1998, he's been involved in the optimisation of water pumping by considering the water energy nexus.
I can see myself on the screen.
Yes, and we can hear you now. Welcome. Thank you, Angus. Great to have you. So I'd really like to welcome our 4 wonderful panellists, obviously very well qualified to talk about this really important issue. So thank you for joining us today. So just by way of introduction before we start to get into challenging our panel, the water energy nexus refers to the relationship between water and energy. In broad terms, water and energy is well understood. Water is needed for the traditional forms of energy production, and energy is needed for water production and supply in traditional urban water supply systems. But one thing we do know, this, as with many other things, is changing. So today we'll discuss how the relationship between water and energy in our urban water supply systems is changing and what's driving these changes. And really importantly, we'll have the opportunity to discuss how the industry and researchers are responding to these changes and what are some of the challenges we face in this context. So, great panel discussion topic. Really looking forward to it. And again, I'd just like to remind everyone that we really welcome questions from you, the audience. So please take advantage of the Q&A box and you can start submitting your questions to the panel anytime. But what I'd like to do to start off is to turn to you, Wen-Yan, and ask you, why is the water energy nexus in urban water supply systems changing, and what are these changes?
Yes, so the relationship between water and energy in our urban water supply system is changing is because the system itself is changing. Within traditional systems, we mainly rely on centralized water supply from surface water sources like reservoirs and rivers, and groundwater sources in some cases. Now we have a variety of water sources with different quality and availability in terms of quantity and the supply pattern. Similarly, the energy sources used to produce and supply water are changing as well. We now include more renewable sources such as solar and wind. Many of these alternative sources of water and energy can be localized. So we are now moving from a traditionally centralized system to a combination of centralized and decentralized system. In addition, in the traditional system, the water-energy relationship mainly focuses on energy for water, looking into where within the system energy has been used to produce and supply water and how much energy has been used. Now, we have started to look into opportunities to recover energy within the water supply system, while technologies such as pump as turbine in distribution systems or anaerobic digestion of sewage sludge in wastewater treatment. The energy recovered can then be used within the system for water production and the supply. It can also potentially be sold to the national electricity market. So these changes are mainly driven by 3 long-term drivers, which are climate change, population growth, and the development in technology.
Great, thanks, Wen-Yan. That's a really comprehensive answer and great introduction to our discussion today. Lisa, I'd like to turn to you now and ask, where does South Australian SA Water fit in the energy water nexus?
Thanks, Sharon. So firstly, we're a really large energy consumer. We have some really big pipelines running from the River Murray to Adelaide and to regional areas. We have a lot of large pumping stations within our distribution networks, Our water and wastewater treatment plants use a lot of energy, and also the Adelaide desalination plant is a big consumer of energy. And power plants in the state also are among our major customers, so they're using a lot of water from us. So we're using energy to provide water to energy generation. We're also an energy generator ourselves. We produce electricity from biogas at our wastewater treatment plants, and we have a couple of mini hydro turbines within our distribution network as well. We've already come a long way on our energy journey. We're a direct participant in the national electricity market, and we're currently expanding our energy generation portfolio under our Zero Cost Energy Future initiative. As well as the cost of energy being a driver in our decision making, our energy loads can be large enough to actually impact the state's electricity system and market. So there's really a two-way influence between energy and water systems in South Australia.
Great, thanks Lisa. Great overview. Sean, can I turn to you now and ask, how's Barwon Water responding to the changing water energy nexus in the urban supply system?
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. As part of our Strategy 2030, we've set ourselves some stretch goals in terms of being 100% renewable energy by 2025 and zero net emissions by 2030. And there's nothing like a stretch goal to make you think differently. And we've really taken a portfolio approach to achieving this stretch goal. On the demand side, we've initiated what we call the Energy Project, which is a partnership between Barwon Water, energy efficiency expert, process expert, controls expert and construction expert to look at reducing the demand at our 7 of our sites. And quite often the case with water industry, a couple of sites really dominate your energy use. So 7 sites for us represent 70% of our energy use. On the supply side, we've invested significantly in solar capacity behind our meter. Our main wastewater plant has the biggest solar array in southern Victoria, an 8,000 panel solar array producing 4.4 gigawatt hours of renewable energy and providing 35% of the plant's demand. And our main water treatment plant, we have a solar battery array that provides 41% of the site's demand. And actually, in March, between 7 a.m. and 8:30 p.m, that plant was off the grid due to the solar battery array. But what we found is there's only so much you can do behind your meter, and then you need to look broader. And that's seen us look at an industry level and a regional level. So at an industry level, we've partnered with 12 other leading Victorian water corps to purchase 78 gigawatt hours of renewable electricity from a solar farm in northwest Victoria, and this has actually been purchased under a new umbrella organisation called Zero Emissions Water, or ZOO, and doing that on a collective basis has helped us achieve savings and also helped develop a new facility in the state. And then at a regional level, we're working with local councils and our trade waste industrial customers to implement renewable organic networks, or RONs as we call them, which really sort of transform organic municipal and trade waste that would have normally gone to landfill or our water rec plants into renewable energy and soil enhancers. And the organic waste is converted into a biogas that drives an engine that creates electricity and hot water. And the electricity powers our plant and feeds in the grid. And Australian first, the hot water supplied to offset industry's gas use. So through a hot water network. The first one is under construction in Colac in partnership with Australian Land Company and Buller Dairy Foods to convert their waste into energy. And the second one we're initiating at the moment, an investigation phase with 5 councils in our region to convert 20,000 tonnes of food organics into renewable energy.
Wow, quite a lot there. That's great. Thanks, Sean. And I'd just like to turn to the audience and encourage you. Great that we've heard this initial comments back from our water corporations and the initial introduction. I'm about to turn to Angus and ask him a question, but I also just want to encourage our audience out there, if you'd like to start feeding questions in, please do so. I can see we've got one in so far. But while that's happening, Angus, could I turn to you and ask, what's the role of university researchers in responding to addressing the challenges faced by the industry in relation to this issue?
Thanks, Sharon. Good afternoon, everybody. So I see the role of university as quite important. It's two things. One is to really work on problems of practical interest to the water industry, but it's also to introduce new and smart technology and ideas to the water industry. So I guess there's two kind of frames for looking. There's the short term, where we can apply some of these techniques that are being developed to problems that are problems now. But it's also looking at what we should be developing in 5, 10, 20 years' time. Lisa's mentioned the large energy costs associated with SA Water, but there are many utilities who are committed to, as Sean has said, to zero net energy cost or zero greenhouse emissions by some future date. SA Water is embarking on a program of putting behind the meter renewables in terms of photovoltaic cells and also batteries. So they're planning to spend $305 million. So they're really committed to changing the way they source electricity. As Sharon mentioned in the beginning, I've been working in the area of optimisation, applied to the optimisation of pumping in cooperation with industry partners since about 1998. And we started off using multi-objective genetic algorithms at that stage, and that's been used quite a lot. But 2 years ago, and this is also, I see as an important part of the role of university researchers, is I started working with an interdisciplinary team on water energy nexus problems. So I started cooperating with both electrical engineering at the University of Adelaide and also at the University of Melbourne through Wenyan. And what we're doing is developing techniques that use a technique called recursive economic model predictive control that comes from electrical engineering that civil engineers really don't get exposed to or know much about. And this is particularly useful in determining the schedule of pumping. SA Water has really been fantastic to work with because they've provided a really excellent case study on one of the pipelines that Lisa mentioned for pumping a great deal of water into Adelaide each year. And we've got currently a number of student projects that are focusing on this particular case study, some at the University of Melbourne and also some at Adelaide. And SA Water is providing an enormous amount of pumping operational data and also staff input for co-supervision of those. Lisa mentioned they buy energy on the market, and there's actually the AEMO 1 half hour spot market, which is in contrast to, say, a 2-part tariff, a peak and off-peak tariff, and 40-hour forecasts of these prices are available. So SA Water is a control room where they're looking at these prices all the time and deciding when to pump. So that's current operation. The next step, as I mentioned before, is to add behind-the-meter renewables, PV and panels. So that's going to change the optimisation or the operational paradigm quite significantly. For example, a lot of the PV will be during the day, so instead of perhaps pumping at night, they'll be pumping during the day. So once they add the behind-the-meter renewables, there's going to be some additional questions to answer. So when do you run the pumps? Now, clearly, if you've got the PV during the day, you're going to be running them during the day. But also there might be some advantages to charging or discharging the battery, or depending on the price of electricity from the AEMO market, when do you take or send electricity into the grid? The combination of approaches by civil and electrical engineers to these problems, both disciplines look at these problems differently. So combining skills from both disciplines has really been excellent. So thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Thank you for that comprehensive answer, Angus. Good to get that kind of picture painted. Wenyan, I wanted to turn to you and just ask, taking a step back now into the international sphere, I know that you've conducted a study looking at responses to the changing nature of the water energy nexus in urban water supply systems internationally. And I'm just wondering if you could perhaps give us an overview of what some of your findings are, so we can understand that international context relative to our domestic situation, which we've just heard about from our panel?
Yeah, sure. So yes, we did a review study last year with few international authors from a few different countries, looking into the main drivers of the changing water energy nexus in urban water supply systems, and secondly, looking at how people have been responding to these changes. We conducted the review through the lenses of 4 application areas within the urban water supply systems, which are long-term planning, system design, system operation, and system rehabilitation. So we found out basically around the world, people have been responding to this changing nature of water energy relationship in some very similar ways in these different 4 application areas. For example, most of those application areas from different countries, they all consider to include energy or greenhouse gas emission reduction as an objective in their planning, design, rehabilitation, or operation. And they all consider renewable energy sources to reduce emission or energy requirement from the centralized grid. And most of them also consider integrated planning of water and energy system together. But there are also some very different responses in terms of the different application areas. For example, integrating water system planning within the urban planning is only considered in the application area of system design, which kind of makes sense because when you design the new system and you can embed it into a larger context. However, for long-term planning, probably we need to do something similar as well. And in addition, how to bring the benefits associated with cheaper and more accessible technology to disadvantaged communities has only been considered in rehabilitation of existing systems. So I guess when you consider the design and operation of existing systems, this factor hasn't been considered. So overall, we found out there are 3 major responses in long-term planning, system design and operation, and also 5 major responses in system rehabilitation. Back to you, Sharon.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Wenyan. I actually want to pick up now on we've got questions coming in from the audience now, which is great. There's a question here about how good is our knowledge about energy intensity of getting water to the end user at the utility and building level, particularly when designers of buildings or sites are looking at on-site water treatment. Do you think they're doing so with an understanding of whether on-site treatment results in water that has a higher or lower energy intensity? Do any of our panellists want to address that one?
I might start, Sharon, and we can go from there. And I'll probably just start. I mean, I can't comment to specific building owners, but I just might start with a general comment that, in terms of business cases that we're developing now for assets that we build, the energy use profile is a key element of that business case, and I guess the cost to offset or that energy with renewable energy is now being factored into our business cases. So I think it is an important consideration when you are, building new infrastructure to consider that.
Great.
Did anyone else want to comment? Any of our other panellists want to comment on that?
No.
Can I just make a comment in relation to data collection? I think one of the, in part of my work, and this is a comment I'll make in terms of a question about challenges, one of the challenges I think is to have adequate data. And so measuring things like having smart meters to measure data so that you've got data that you can analyse to determine those profiles of users is extremely important. So data also so that's in terms of electricity usage, but also data in terms of having flow meters in the system, for example, to measure things. So measurement is extremely important, and I think collecting data and making sure that you've got good, and many of the water utilities are doing this now. For example, when I've been working with SA Water, they've got a very good historic database of data for pumping and when pumps are on, how much energy, how much power is used, how much energy is being used, and that's invaluable for developing the models and understanding what the actual usage is. And thinking about that question about energy intensity, you really need to measure those things. And I think Sean has just pointed that out with some of the comments he's made.
Yeah. Angus, while we're on this, did you want to respond to the question here about the investment of does investment downstream of the meter make economic and life cycle emissions sense, or would it be better waiting until movement occurs in the upstream power supply system?
I think from my work with SA Water, I think you can reduce the costs considerably by going behind the meter, but I think you need to do an economic evaluation. You really need to have tools to look at, well, you're going to need to do a total life cycle costing of what are the costs of the panels, what are the costs of the batteries, how are you going to operate the system, those two things in terms of the actual infrastructure that you buy to go behind the meter, and how you operate it are important. Also decisions about, well, should you go on to, like SA Water, buying electricity from the market? I mean, that's an issue. Or do you stick with a contract where you have a fixed price contract for off-peak or peak electricity? So all of these questions really need thorough evaluation. I don't think it's easy to say, well, yes, you should go one way or the other. It really needs to be carefully considered, and really you need to do a life cycle cost analysis in order to evaluate whether you should move behind the meter or whether you should just continue to buy electricity off the grid. Things are going to change in terms of the pricing of electricity is going to change in the future as we get more wind and solar. Prices are already coming down. Whether that continues to be the case, as the system becomes more unreliable because we've got sourcing from intermittent sources and then we need other things to provide reliable energy such as pumped hydro, then those are going to be additional costs, and I think that will drive up the overall cost of delivering electricity again. But so I think the answer really is you've got to do an analysis for your particular individual situation to make that decision of whether you just continue to buy from the market and you try to negotiate a good contract with an electricity provider, or you decide to go behind the meter and save those costs, but you have to pay for that infrastructure in order to go behind the meter.
Yeah. I would like
to just add on the... Oh, sorry, Wenyan.
Sorry, you go, Lisa, first.
Just on the behind the meter discussion, I guess one of the... we often focus just on the cost of energy consumption, as in what we pay just for the electrons, I guess. But what behind the meter really helps you with is there are a whole lot of other fees and charges that are related to the system, the electricity system, and having access to it. And having energy generation behind the meter actually can help you reduce some of those costs, as well as reducing your energy consumption costs, which is why it's often beneficial.
Yeah, I'd just like to make a comment. I'm not an expert in energy systems, but a few years ago, there was a study coming out looking at integrated urban water supply systems at different scale. So it's cluster scale, community scale, or large city scale for greenfield study, like not rehabilitating existing systems. So what they looked at cost and emissions associated with energy cost. Really, the answer is really case study dependent. So depending the particular location and the particular attributes of the system, different scale may have the best outcome. So for the case study, I can't really remember, I think it was a site in South Australia. They concluded it cannot go too small, but the overall one centralized system wouldn't work either. Or not wouldn't work, but wouldn't have the best energy and cost efficiency. So I guess this question on whether or not we should develop behind the meter technology or use all centralized energy supply perhaps is similar. Again, I agree with Angus, like a lot of research needs to go on to provide a big, complete picture on this.
And Sharon, I just might build on Lisa's answer there too. What we've found is particularly wastewater infrastructure being a large behind-the-meter demand helps get some of these business cases to stack up, because you don't have all the network costs and you get the benefit of the network cost reductions. And essentially you, by taking the large wastewater infrastructure off the grid, you provide grid benefits to the broader grid in terms of removing a large demand. And I think, following on from Angus's discussion around solar and wind variability, bioenergy projects provide a dispatchable 24/7 energy solution. So actually able to help stabilise the grid to an effect as well.
Great, thank you. Actually, there's a question here I think it kind of leads on in terms of this issue around price. And the question is, should utilities charge different prices if the energy requirements and cost is higher to service a specific location? And if not, why not?
I'd like to jump in on that one. I think SA Water's philosophy, and I agree with it, is that if we're providing the same service to people, which is a very basic service, a very important human right, the supply of water, that we shouldn't be charging people in some areas more than in other areas if they're getting the same service. So people in regional areas should not have to pay more for water than people in the city, just because they live in a regional area and it might use us more energy to get the water there. If people have got a different level of service, we have some customers that we provide only off-peak services to or raw water services to, then we do have a different pricing structure because it's a different service. But if the level of service is the same, even if it uses more energy to get the water to someone, I think they should be paying the same amount.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah. I agree with what Lisa said there. And I think into the future, I guess one of the other elements of the water energy nexus is it's reducing rainfall dependent water sources and pushing us to more expensive water sources like desal and recycled water. So I think there's some opportunity to look at pricing models in the future that really reflect the level of service and the amount of water used on a true user pays basis. So I think that's an area to look at in the future.
Great, thank you. Oh, look, we've got some great questions. I'm a bit torn about which pathway to go down. I think I'm going to stick with the questions that are coming in from the audience now, just because I think it's interesting to explore some of these questions here around. There's a few here around the demand side of things, and I guess let me pose this one. What potential is there for modifying consumer behaviour via smart meters, water smart meters, to better match the lower costs of energy periods?
Yeah, I think this sort of builds on what Angus was talking about around data. And as households get better data on their water use, they become more aware. And with the awareness becomes a greater focus within the house. I know that's the case with my house of 5. You can see when certain people are having longer showers. It really sort of highlights that. So that data is really powerful for the individual, but then also at a network basis, it enables you to identify leakage issues earlier and respond to that as well. So, yep.
And I would like to add a comment on that. In our review study, looking at the responses to this changing nature of the energy water nexus globally, we actually found a gap exactly in this space, how this changing nature has been affecting consumer behavior and how in return consumer behavior has been affecting this energy water relationship again. So I guess one important reason there is a gap over here is the lack of data.
Great, thank you. I think that's something Oh, sorry.
No,
I was
you
gonna
please
say,
go,
I think
Lisa.
that's something.
Utilities will be doing more and more in the future is customer smart meters and having and increasing that amount of data that we have for individual customers so that they can see their water use patterns and they can maybe make changes in their behaviour. But I think that will be a bit of a slow progress. It's that, there's a lot of individual meters that you'd have to replace before you can start doing that, and the communications as well, like sending that data to a centralised source as well. So I think it would be a while before we see that as a widespread occurrence.
Yeah, great, thank you. There's a question here about the issue of addressing waste of water. So the question is, obviously if there's a waste of water, there's a waste of energy. Is anyone looking at consumption by domestic, commercial or ag consumers in these terms, and how reducing waste will help to achieve net zero?
Yes is the answer. Definitely in terms of looking at our water future, we're not only looking at new water sources, but the opportunity to reduce water wastage right from the catchment through to the tap. And at the moment, we've got an analytics program going on at the looking at over 30 different, water loss points from catchment to tap, and understanding, how much water we lose across those points and where, the community and us best invest in water reduction. So, but it's definitely, one of the key considerations. And I think as we move to more expensive water sources in the future, the business case for investing in efficiency and water use reduction becomes more and more viable as well.
Great, thank you. I'm going to change tack here for a moment and come back to you, Lisa, and ask you, what challenges have you come up against in participating directly in the energy market?
So firstly, it definitely complicates our decision making. So we have a 24/7 control centre where we have operators all the time looking at the networks and deciding when to turn pumps on and off, or to change the production rate of treatment plants and things like that. And before participating in the electricity market, the main drivers of that were demand, and we may have had two-part tariffs, for example, so it would be cheaper to pump overnight and on the weekends, but that was a very static situation, whereas the electricity market, the price changes every 30 minutes. So it definitely complicates that process. And what we do need is to have very good information coming in for those operators on the desk so that they can make good decisions. And so we've put a lot of effort into creating dashboards and tools to bring information in about the electricity market so that our operators have that at hand and can make good decisions. The other challenge can be quick and reliable control of our major pump stations. A lot of these are very old pump stations and they have relatively old control systems, and we're communicating with them by radio networks. So someone in Victoria Square in the middle of the city presses a button and that communication gets sent by radio link to a pump station to turn a pump on or off. That communication is obviously not always 100% reliable. And we have to control each pump individually. So what we're doing with some upgrades at the moment to some of our control systems is setting them up so that we can actually control pipelines as a whole and set up a more automated control of those pump stations. And another challenge that we've worked on is having in-house expertise and knowledge, and that's really helpful to have people in SA Water who are employed to understand the electricity market and to give us advice on that has been really useful. And also a lot of other people in the business, including myself, have done training and through experience have got a better understanding of the electricity market. That is really important to have that knowledge on hand when we need it. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I wanted to turn to another question we've got from our audience here. So the question is, with the implementation of biomass energy generation and or mini pump hydro, what is the potential percentage that can be generated out of the total energy requirements of systems like SA Water and Barwon Water?
So for Barwon Water, we've got a relatively flat system. So hydro's not a significant opportunity, but bioenergy is. And the two initiatives that I spoke about before will potentially produce 50% of our energy requirements. So make a significant reduction in our energy demand.
For us as well at SA Water, the biogas generation is the biggest component of our energy generation, but we do have the 2 mini hydros that help us out. At the moment, I think they're about 10 to 15% of our overall energy consumption, but we're obviously looking to expand our energy generation under the Zero Cost Energy Future initiative, which will be mainly solar panels. That won't get us to 100% generation of our energy, but it will be a large portion of our energy consumption will then come from our solar panels.
Great, thank you. And just leading on from that, there's another question here. The Australian Energy Market Commission has recently stated the energy market will be transformed to a two-way grid with an immediate mechanism to be introduced in 2021. Are the water corporations attuned to such changes and planning to adopt?
I think someone in SA Water would be across that. It's not me. But there are people who are looking at the future of the electricity market and what changes are coming. I'm aware of one which is changing from a 30-minute settlement price to a 5-minute settlement price. So we're already thinking about that one, but I'm sure our energy teams are across that one.
Yeah, and again, I'll probably talk at a bit of a higher level, but I know any of the business cases we're looking at, because there is so much variability in the potential of where the energy market's going into the future, we really take a probability-based estimate of energy structures and energy prices into the future, and feed that into a risk-based assessment on our investment. So, looking at P50s, P90s, P10s as to where the energy market could go as part of your investment decision profile.
Great, thank you. There's a question here about someone's asking that they'd be interested in understanding why non-sector specific technology like solar PV is becoming the preferred choice for a renewable energy source for this industry instead of recovery of embedded energy from biogas or hydro.
I think for SA Water at least, we already recover almost all that we can at our wastewater treatment plants. So that's something that we already do. The mini hydro question, there aren't a lot of places that are well set up for that. Like what Sean said, that in Barwon Water, they're looking at a relatively flat profile. That means there's not that many opportunities to put in mini hydros. We've got 2 in our networks, and there might be a couple more places that we could put them in, but I think the business case doesn't stack up quite as well as the solar panels. Solar panels have been around for quite a while. The cost keeps coming down, and I think the business case for them stacks up a bit better than mini hydros typically.
Yeah, and I think all this comes down to a portfolio approach and not putting all your eggs in one basket. So what we're looking at is a range of different purchasing arrangements and also renewable energy sources and types that then sort of bind together to get you a net solution. So I think you got to not put all your eggs in one basket and spread it over. But I think like Lisa said, I guess the investment portfolio or the return on investments changing significantly with technologies as they develop, and probably solar and wind are probably slightly ahead in that and provide a better return on investment at the moment, and the other options are catching up at the moment. And that's why we find it's important to take a leadership approach as a water authority and prove up some of these other alternatives so that the investment profile becomes more, more exciting for the public sector to invest in.
Just to comment on the behind the meter, if you compare PV and say mini hydro, the two mini hydro sites that SA Water have provide electricity to the community, so they're not really providing behind the meter benefits. And as Lisa pointed out before, there's two benefits. There's the energy, so if you have a hydropower system, a mini hydro, then you sell the energy and get benefit from that. But if you've got behind the meter, then you reduce the demand charge, and that can be quite significant. That can be half the electricity bill. So it can, in terms of economics, it can be much more beneficial to put in solar panels. Also, in SA Water's case, for their major pumping stations, they're coming from the River Murray across country, 60 to 80 kilometres. So many of the pumping stations are in farmland. So you can purchase farmland or have access to put in the solar panels around that site. So really it comes down to an economic evaluation, but the behind the meter does give the benefit of reducing the demand charges in addition to saving energy, as Lisa pointed out previously. And I think that's an important element in the economic analysis that plays out to perhaps prefer putting in behind the meter with solar.
Great, thanks, Angus. I wanted to turn to you and Wenyan now, and we're running short of time, so I think this may be the last question, but we'll see how we go. And the question is, what would or should the role of university teaching be in the future of the water energy nexus, particularly in the preparation of our future students to be ready to tackle all of the challenges that we've been thinking about?
I think it is really incumbent on universities to start teaching students about these interdisciplinary skills. I try to do that in the water distribution classes that I teach into because the relationship between solar, wind, electricity, electrical engineering and civil engineering is becoming so important to utilities that the students really know. And I guess one thing that I do in one of my classes is I have 12 people come in from industry to give their perspectives. For example, Lisa gives a presentation and she talks, and there's a lot of talk about energy. So I think it's really important that our students are exposed to these things. We tend to be in silos, partly within civil, mechanical and electrical, for example. And I think we need to break these things down and expose our students. For example, I'm co-supervising an electrical engineering group this year, so they're getting exposed to a lot of the modelling, the simulation modelling, EPA net associated with civil engineering. So I think that's good for these students are getting exposed to a variety of these disciplines. Previously, we used to give more interdisciplinary courses in the first and second year, but that's really gone out of our courses now. Perhaps we need to bring that back in because these problems, once if you're in a position like Sean or Lisa, you're just not only dealing with one discipline, you're dealing with a broad range of disciplines, and you need to take into account a large portfolio of ideas and disciplines in order to make decisions for your authority.
Definitely, I agree with you, Angus. So now the university study, we need to take one step up. Apart from teaching the students the numerical skills, for example, how to solve differential equations, we actually need to move up to teach the students the bigger context within which they can use those skills. So at University of Melbourne, we are actually reviewing and redeveloping our environmental engineering curriculum to introduce more real-world context, introduce more subjects on problem-solving based study. So the students are exposed to those real-world problems during their study, and they will learn those numerical skills, but more importantly, they will learn how to apply those skills during their subjects and to solve real-world problems. This way, once they graduate, it will not be such a shock for them to say, oh, actually, I know how to solve this mathematical equation, but I don't know actually how that's linked to this problem.
Great, thanks, Wenyan. Look, I'm sorry to say we've run out of time now in terms of panel discussion, and I'm really mindful of respecting people's time. So at this point, on behalf of the Water, Environment and Agriculture program at Melbourne Uni, I'd really like to extend our thanks to the panel for your contribution. I think it's been a really interesting discussion and really great to have perspectives across industry and from the research community, and that's really where we get the richness in these water security panel discussions. So I would really like to thank all of you today for your participation. It's been excellent. I'd also really like to thank the panel, the audience for your participation. It's great. It's always a bit of a challenge to see the fabulous questions that are coming in from the panel, from the audience, and I can see that we've got a large number of people who are listening to this discussion and to have that exchange. So I'd really like to thank our audience. Obviously, the webinar format, we've all been adapting to this new way of communicating, and I think we've been really pleased to be able to keep bringing the water security seminar series to the audience and to enable these panel discussions. So thank you to the panel and the audience. I'd like to flag that our next water security event will be on the 15th of July, where industry panellists will discuss the recent changes in Victorian rainfall and runoff, findings and implications. So really important topic for our sector. Again, you'll be able to register via our website, and there'll be information in the coming days on that. So just to flag that for something to put in your diaries. Again, to thank everyone for their participation. We're running a survey process as part of our seminar series. We'd really appreciate your participation in completing the post-event survey, which will appear on your screen when the session ends, or there'll be a link in the chat box. We'd love to get your feedback. It's very valued. If you've got any suggestions for topics that are important to you, we'd love to be able to keep responding to industry needs and bring together speakers and topics that are of really particular interest and focus. So please do take the time to fill out that survey. And we have a couple of minutes left, and I guess I'd just say, are there any, from our panellists, are there any parting words of wisdom? We've got 3 minutes that you'd like to share with the audience as a kind of key takeaway.
Parting words of wisdom, I guess I'd probably leave with how I started in taking that portfolio approach to addressing these challenges. And it's a really exciting field to get in, and like Angus says, stretches you into a whole range of different disciplines, and there's a real growth opportunity as an industry and as individuals to tackle the water energy nexus.
Great, thanks, Sean.
Can I just make a couple of comments? I think there's a big resource in our universities, and I don't think we do industry university engagement as well as we can, as well as some other countries do around the world. In particular, I'm thinking of Germany. So I think if you're in a water utility, think about interacting with a university. There's lots of things you can do in terms of student projects. Because one of the things we want to be exposing, as Wenyan said, exposing our students to is real world problems. And we need to, if we're going to have productive research that meets the needs of industry, we need to understand what your needs are. And the way to do that is to work on problems together, to have PhD students or honours students working on these problems. So I'd encourage you, approach your local university, or approach, because we've got Zoom now, doesn't matter whether you're in Western Australia or Queensland, you can approach people who are experts in the various areas and talk to them about your issues and see if there is a match for working together, because I think that's going to be beneficial to Australia if we can get more industry-university interaction.
Great, thanks, Angus. I think I'll end the session there. We're right on 1 o'clock, and just recognise that the themes of collaboration in interdisciplinarity, key ones for today. So great takeaway messages. Thank you all again for your time, and thank you to our audience for your participation, and please do fill out the survey if you've got the time. It would be most appreciated. Thanks, everyone.